So we're going to get started. It's 5:30, and it's like what they say at the beginning of an airplane flight. If you are not here for the workshop on choosing a community, you can still stay, but that is where we're going, okay, in the next couple of hours. So settle back and enjoy. We've got a couple of different presentations tonight, and for a few of you who have seen this before, you sort of know how this works. We are attempting to broker a conversation between anthropology students and engineering students about issues of common interest. And the stuff that we are talking about, for the most part, involves a lot of the community projects that engineers are involved in. And anthropologists get involved in community projects as well, but it's only been recently that we've started to talk to each other about what's going on here on the Purdue campus. So, last semester we organized a set of 3 workshops, and this semester we decided to repeat the process but with some updates and modifications. So this semester's 3-part series isn't quite like last semester's. And tonight in particular is different because we are going to talk about how you choose a community in the first place. We know full well that a lot of engineering students get given communities to work in or get projects assigned to them. Fair enough. But a lot of you are going to be in the position of eventually choosing field placements or choosing places to work. And so we want to talk about how you make those very, very important framing choices. Because if you get that right, then a lot of the rest of your project will go well. If you get that wrong, well, you can still probably survive the project, but it'll be a lot harder and a lot more complicated. So I want to start this by just going through some things and giving you a couple of examples about how I did choices of community in the past. My name is Ryle Nolan. I'm a social anthropologist. For 20 years I was a development anthropologist. I worked in Asia and Africa, North Africa, and then most recently in the Soviet Union. And I did a lot of community work. So I'm going to draw on some of those examples for you tonight. This will not take particularly long. Once I'm done, we have a few minutes for discussion, questions, and then we're going to segue into presentations by our engineering and our anthropology students about how they're doing stuff right now. All right, so we're going to talk about what a community is, and I'm going to talk about 2 experiences that I had and try and relate these to your concerns today, and then start talking about how you collect information at a distance when you cannot be there permanently, how you decide what you're going to be doing there, and then how you make first contact with one of these communities and manage the relationship from that point on. If anybody has burning questions as I go along, just raise your hand and interrupt me, otherwise there will be a lot of time for questions after this. So first of all, what's a community? We tend to romanticize communities. We tend to think they're friendly places, they're happy places. We often contrast small communities that look a little bit like this one in the picture with big cities that are impersonal and violent and unfriendly, and that's not really true. Communities are places, but they're also communities of interest. They're not always happy and cohesive places. Some communities are strife-ridden, some communities are very poor, some communities have major problems. And they may be divided and contentious at war with each other. They may be badly led by corrupt officials or whatever. So one of the things you have to sort of think about is what kind of a community would you feel comfortable in? And if you're looking for somewhere very remote and very sort of pristine, I would suggest that you're probably going in the wrong direction. There are plenty of communities very accessible to you, but each community is unique, and each community will have a set of problems that you will eventually become aware of. I'm going to talk about 2 experiences that I had personally with communities. I did some community development work a long time ago, in the late 60s in Senegal, in West Africa. 25 or 30 years later, I found myself in the former Soviet Union doing the same thing. And although those 2 places seem conceptually very, very far apart, they're actually very similar to one another in terms of some salient characteristics. In both cases, the choice of a community for us to work in was made over a fairly long period of time. It was not a quick decision. And in both cases, we looked at a wide variety of communities before we settled on the one or the ones that we were going to work with. And in that process of negotiating with a variety of communities, we learned an enormous amount, which helped us modify our own frameworks. We had one idea going in, and by the time we finished discussions with a dozen communities, we had changed our minds about a lot of things. And in fact, our project had become considerably improved. So the 2 points that emerge from that are, first of all, you do have to have a sort of a narrative or a story or something to sell, as it were, going in. But secondly, you should expect that to change over time as the dialogue between you and that community develops. Okay? So here was the first example. This is Senegal. Senegal is, as most of you know, a country in the western part of Africa. In Senegal, there's a region quite close to the capital city called Thiès. And inside Thiès, there's a little tiny town where I lived with my Peace Corps partner. And it's called Pout, P-O-U-T. Funny little name for a little funny little town, and there it is. And you can see that this little town of Pout is surrounded by even smaller towns. These are African villages, okay, ranging in size from maybe 100 people to 600 or 800 people. And so this was our area. And so my Peace Corps partner and I said, all right, what are we going to do here? And first we had to develop our narrative. And what we were was we were well diggers. We were Peace Corps trained well diggers. We had some new and improved technical ways to build wells, which we thought would be useful to people in an area, by the way, which is very scarce on water. These people have a very deep water table. It's down about 130 feet, and they need water, and the wells aren't very well developed or not very well built. And so we had some improved techniques that we thought would be useful. So that was our story going in. We can help you. We can train you in techniques of better well building. And in order to do that, we decided to talk to as wide a range of villages as possible. So we identified a dozen different small African villages within a 5-kilometer, 10-kilometer radius of our little town of Pout, and off we went. This is the kind of settlement pattern you're looking at. This is taken off Google Maps, and you can kind of see what it is. These are the kinds of settlements that they have. Small, not so different from Indiana, if you think about it. Clustered around fields, and then more fields, and then another cluster. So this was the community. This was the type of community we had to work with. It was relatively easy to move around. We had a little Vespa motor scooter, and so we used that. Sometimes there weren't roads into these places. It didn't really matter in the motor scooter. We just took off across the sand, and off we went. And this was me, the left-hand picture, on my little motor scooter, headed down. That's what it looks like. Okay, very bushy, not very well developed. No running water, no electricity, dirt roads, you know, not much going on. And we met in a dozen different villages with village elders. And there's a picture of us on the right having one of these discussions. We sat down, we said, hi, we're American Peace Corps volunteers. We've got some stuff that we can make available to you if you want to start a well project. We can help. Those discussions went in very, very interesting ways. Most of the villagers had no earthly idea what to do with us. We were quite strangers. And so their first reaction was, how much can we get out of these guys? And so they said, sure, come on in, no problem. You build the well and we'll be very grateful. We said, no, it doesn't work that way. We're going to train you. So we need you to invest in with people and with money, because we don't have any money to buy the cement and the gravel to make this well. You're going to have to do that. And at that point, about half of them dropped out immediately, said, gee, we can't do that, sorry. So what we were seeing, in other words, was a continuation, if you want to put a political economy spin on it, of a colonial relationship, where for a long time, French people had been in this place kind of telling people what to do and getting everything done, building the roads, the highways, the railroads, you know, the power lines. They saw us as pretty much the same sort of people. It took a while for us to talk them back from that position. And most of these villages never did get it. A few of them said, well, you know, maybe, but then they copped out as well. In the end, we had 3 villages out of 12 that seemed to understand what we were doing and were willing to work with us. So we began to work with those 3 villages. Of the 3, 1 turned out to be absolutely superb. They did over and above. And we went and did a whole series of projects with these people. We did wells, we did irrigation systems, we helped them build a community school, we helped them put up a village water tower, and in the end it was a totally transformative experience for all of us, me myself included. But it took time. It took about 2.5 years. And so this is how we started. This is the high-tech well building, right? Take a look at it. It's pretty primitive, but this was better than what they had been doing. So we brought in a truck, as you can see in the background, and some basic equipment, and we trained them. Yes?
When you say like they fit, you're kind of saying like they fit your vision of development. Like, I don't know, you're saying that out of all the 12 villages, there's one that fit your vision of development.
Well, basically, we had something to sell, if you see what I mean, and we needed a buyer.
I just think that's a curious word choice.
What?
In that, because they fit your vision of what you were selling.
Well, no, not exactly. I mean, why did we offer what we did? Because we knew from living there, we didn't start off, you know, we didn't like get up on the second day after we'd arrived there and said, okay, we're going to do this. We went around and sort of took a look at what was going on. There were health problems, but they were mainly water problems. That was what they didn't have access to, clean, abundant water. And it was simply a question of technique. Everybody knew where the water was. And they were digging these very dangerous wells by hand without reinforcement. And they were sometimes caving in on them, and they would get like soaked during the rainy season and cave, you know how wells will go. And so our approach was to say, we have a better way to do this, and we can train you. So it wasn't like we were inventing the need for them. They had the need. We were bringing a solution in. And you're right, I mean, it was our solution. It's what we knew how to do. They sometimes said, well, what we really need is health education. And we said, we're not doctors, we can't do that. You see what I mean? There were lots of things that they, quote, wanted that we couldn't do. But you're right, it's a good question, yeah. So anyway, this worked really well for us because we took time, and in the process, we learned to speak the languages fluently, and we learned a lot about these people. And so it made us better at doing what we were doing. Okay, so fast forward 25 or 30 years, and here I am now working in the Soviet Union in the 1990s. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, or the Berlin Wall, I should say, Soviet higher education was in disarray. And the Ford Foundation and the Pew Charitable Trusts funded us. I was working at the University of Pittsburgh at the time, to make contact with our Russian counterparts in academia and to work with them to develop new courses in international relations, which now reflected the very changed positions of the former Soviet countries. And so we embarked on a very similar sort of thing, where we needed partners. We had an idea of what we wanted, as it were, to propose to them. And now we needed partners. So off we went. And we started this when the Soviet Union was still in effect, and it continued right through the dissolution of the wall and the creation of the Russian Federation. So we worked in all these countries: Poland, Czech Republic, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. We didn't work in Belarus, we didn't work in Romania, but everywhere else we were there. And it took a long time, as before. Very, very different from working in West Africa, as you can imagine. Mostly we went in the vacation times, which would be in the winter. It was very cold. We had never really encountered stuff like that before. Even though I'm from upstate New York, winter in St. Petersburg is different. And we encountered, you know, lots and lots of bureaucratic obstacles that we hadn't encountered in West Africa, but it was still a very, very rapid learning experience for us. The environment was very strange to us. We were not used to it. We had to learn very, very fast how to find our way around in this new environment, where we were viewed, again, as representatives of an outside culture with whom they'd had a lot of experience, but of a very specific kind, right? So we were capitalist Westerners. And eventually, oh, and we traveled in some very interesting things. That's an old Tupolev up at the upper left. That's a Volga on the upper right. And the bottom is a great train, which if you ever get there, you should take this train. It's called the Krasnaya Strela, the red streak, the red arrow. And it's a crack express train that goes between Moscow and St. Petersburg. Guaranteed it'll be the ride of your life. It's wonderful. But some of this wasn't so wonderful. So we flew all around and took long train trips and car trips. And finally, we made contact with some Russian colleagues that seemed to understand what we were trying to do and were willing to work with us. And so we went from country to country to country, and we basically interviewed dozens and dozens of people who come from different universities, different research institutes, different organizations. And in each case, we explained what we were doing, what we had to offer, and they responded in one way or the other. And as before, 75% of them didn't get it. Or if they got it, they kind of wanted it sort of all coming in. You know, bring us the stuff and we'll take care of it. We said, no, we need a partnership here. We need to learn from each other. And so in the end, we wound up with eight partners out of probably 50 or 60 that we had interviewed. And we embarked on a 5-year program with them, which was very, very successful. But the key to success was that we took our time with it. And we learned and modified our frameworks as we learned. So we wound up with partners in Moscow, which is in the upper right, partners in Estonia on the upper left, partners in, I think that's Kiev in Ukraine at the bottom, and 5 other partners across the region. And the project is still going on. Now, what's the similarity, what's the difference? The similarities were that we had enormous transportation and communication difficulties. We did not speak Wolof in Senegal, which is the local language, when we started. We learned it. By the time we were 6 months in, we had learned it. We didn't speak Russian at first. I got to the point where I could follow simple negotiations, but I identified Russian speakers from our side and got them into our project so that we acquired some linguistic fluency. It's really difficult to talk to people if you can't speak their language. It's just hard. Translation is a very clunky thing to have to do. There were obviously climate adjustments. We had to adjust for, you know, cold, heat, so forth and so on. The cultural difference and the effect of past history on encounters between people in both cases was a major determinant of the way they responded to us. The cultural differences between ourselves and the Russians are not great on one level, but Russians that just emerged from 70 years of restricted contact with the West, there were some real cultural differences there. For example, they didn't know anything at all about the internet. They didn't know anything much about copyright or about how we do peer review. Okay, and so these were major impediments, and we had to sort of understand what they knew and what they didn't know, and then take steps to sort of fill in the blanks. And they likewise had to teach us a lot about how the Russian higher education system worked, and what worked well and what worked badly, and so forth. And we didn't have normal infrastructure. It was virtually impossible to make a phone call out of Russia at the time to anywhere in the West. You could do it, but it was very difficult. You couldn't buy plane tickets except with certain kinds of money. The ruble was all over the place. In other words, there were just all these sort of hassles. These are similar to the kinds of things that you'll encounter if you go and work in Bolivia, Cameroon, Uganda, wherever it is that your travels take you. All of this will be similar. There won't be rubles necessarily, but it'll be that kind of a situation. So those were the similarities. What were the factors that enabled success? Having more than one option, having more than one possible partner was the key to this. Because if you have one possible partner, then there's really no room for negotiation. Your partner sort of says, I will or I won't. It's kind of like the U.S. Congress today, basically. You're stuck. And keeping your options open as long as possible is really the best way to do this. Also, having a clear story to tell people. Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm here because I'm interested in, and then you sort of tell your story. And having that story be very crisp, very clear, very understandable to people is going to help you a lot. Then the ability to learn very quickly, because whatever they respond, that's the start now of class for you guys. You are learning now. Everything from that point on is the environment talking back to you. And so you need to be capable of understanding what is the environment telling us here, and what does that mean for what we started out proposing. So being flexible as you learn things. Knowing when to walk away. This is really hard to do, but it's important. As we negotiated with our African villages, as we negotiated with our Russian partners or potential partners, we would sometimes come to the conclusion this is not working. It's not going to work. These guys don't get it, or we don't understand what they're trying to tell us. For whatever reason, we need to walk away. We need to say in the nicest possible way, thank you very much, but we're moving on. And if you have the ability to do that, it will help you. And then finally, focusing on the people and not the things or the places. We were very interested in building wells. We were very interested in working with universities in Russia. And some of the universities were very glitzy and very sort of well equipped and kind of in neat places. And we thought, oh, this would be a fun place to work. But what we realized was that we have to focus on people. People are the things, as it were, that are going to get that project done for you. And so no matter how the place looks, or no matter what sort of whiz-bang technology they have, if they don't have good people, you're not going to have a good project. So we needed to focus on the people. And in both cases, we were lucky enough to find really, really good people. So what it means for you as you go out and you start picking communities to work in is don't get locked in early. Save decisions until as late in the game as possible. Don't feel obliged to keep on with something that isn't working. If your partner is just not behaving the way you think they should, if you can't satisfy your partner, then it's time to stop. Set up small steps rather than big ones as a way to test commitment and as a way to learn about each other. Do simple, easy things first together. Get a sense of accomplishment going with you and your partner from that, and that will help you. Keep as much flexibility in this process as you can. Find the champions, the informants, the supporters, the stakeholders. Find those people as early as you can and form really good relations with them. And take the time for conversations, because the conversations will be with people, not with things. Conversations will cement the relationships, and the conversations will teach you what you need to know about these places. So, if you start the process, you probably won't be in the community yet. How do you learn at a distance? There are some very simple ways, and you mostly know these things. First of all, you can find people from the area that you're interested in going to. There are students here on campus from every conceivable part of the globe. There are visitors, there are people you can track down here and there. Look at the maps, look at the pictures. There's all sorts of stuff available to you on the internet. Read the travel accounts, read the guidebooks. There's a bunch of stuff written for tourists. You know, don't be proud. You're kind of a tourist too. So read the books, see what they tell you. There may be projects that have been done in that country or that region or that even that town that you're looking at. Find those project reports and read them. See what happened. See how people in NGOs or development agencies describe their experience. They may be accurate, they may be inaccurate, but it's all good data for you. And then finally, there is the statistical data. Climate, rainfall, disease incidence, education levels, whatever, from, you know, USAID, the World Bank, whatever. There's all that stuff that you can get before you even set foot in that community. You can also tap into their local media. You can get on the internet and find radio stations in these countries. You can find newspapers online. You can subscribe to newspapers. You can track down people who visited that area and bring them into your classes or your discussion groups and pick their brains. You can also contact the agencies that work there. If you find out that the WHO has worked in this community or near this community, call up somebody at the WHO and say, I'd like to talk to you for half an hour about this place. What can you tell me about it? And then you can Skype, you can email, you can telephone with people in the community. Now, a lot of you are probably saying, yeah, but my community doesn't have electricity, my community doesn't have Skype connections. Here's my response, and you won't like it. If you don't have connectivity, don't work in that community. It's the biggest obstacle I can think of, not being able to communicate with people on a daily basis. Because if you can't communicate with them, then you are reduced to interacting with them for what? A week? Or two at the most at a time? Once a year? Only 2 or 3 of you? Think about how that's going to go. How much can you possibly learn? All of my experience was sustained contact over a fairly long period of time. Since you can't physically be there, you've got to be there electronically. So you've got to pick places that you can at least have cell phone service or some form of connectivity where if you have a question, you can call somebody up. And that will help you enormously. Now I realize that that's a big obstacle for many of you. Some of you are saying, well, you know, the communities in the most need don't have internet connection. That's true too. But think about what is your ultimate goal. Your ultimate goal is to help people. Your ultimate goal is to learn something about how to help people. Because this isn't the only project you'll ever do in your life. You're going to do many more as a professional. So try and get it right. If you do that, you probably need to pick a place where the chances of success are relatively high. Okay? I realize it's a controversial recommendation, but it's from my experience. Before you go into that community, you've got to figure out what you're really good at. This is a harder question sometimes than it might appear. You've got to balance, in other words, what you know how to do against what they need. And again, I go back to connectivity. If you can't connect with them, how are you going to find out what they need? So you figure out your own values, your own interests, your own skills, and of those, your values and your interests are probably the most important, because skills, yes, you have skills, but you will learn new skills as you interact with these people. Okay? And beware of what I call the law of the hammer. You know what the law of the hammer is, right? Psychologists talk about this. You give a small kid a hammer, and he finds a whole bunch of stuff in your house that needs pounding. Okay? If you're trained, in other words, to do water, or you're trained to do pumps, or you're trained to do turbines, or you're trained to do electricity, you're going to find, oh yeah, they need electricity, they need pumps. This is what we did. This was back to this gentleman's question at the beginning. Why did you pick what you did? Because we've been trained to do water. So that's what we did. It's perfectly okay to do that, but don't impose stuff on people if they don't need it or want it. So beware of that. Okay? So now if you've got a range of communities that you're looking at, you can narrow things down. On the left, I've got my standard key guidelines. All my students hear me say this every semester. If you're going to do a project, whether it's an essay or a community project that's going to last years, make it easy, fun, short, and insightful. Easy because it'll get hard. Fun because there will be times where it isn't so much fun. Short because it will take longer than you think. And insightful because it will teach you something. You are there to learn. You are there to become a better professional and help people in the process. So pick something that will teach you something important about what you're doing. Over on the right, the other things. Accessibility. How do you get in and out of this community? Other things being equal, it's better to choose places you can get in and out of fairly easily. Road connections, bus, train, airplane, whatever it happens to be. Risk. Some communities have certain levels of risk associated with them. Sometimes the risk is inherent in the community. The community is subject to floods. The community is subject to ethnic violence. The community is, I don't know, whatever. Sometimes the risk is in you. You are at risk if you go into this place, okay, because of who you are and what you look like. So think about that. You do not want to put yourself at risk. You don't want to put other people at risk. Prior experience is a very good indicator of how things are going to turn out. Not your prior experience necessarily, theirs. How many other projects like yours have they had in the place? If they've had some successful ones, chances are you'll be successful too, or at least they will be able to teach you how to be successful. If they've had a series of failed projects, well, you can still work with that, but that's the prior experience they've had. And so you enter that environment kind of like we entered the Russian environment as representatives of their age-old Cold War enemy, right? And we had some explaining to do. We had some overcoming to do. The Russians were suspicious of our motives. Why are you here? What are you going to do to us? Size, diversity within the community, the resources and the infrastructure they have available, the scale of what you're attempting to do, all of these things are going to be important. They're very project specific, obviously. But a place that has more diversity and more infrastructure and slightly bigger offers you more opportunities, doesn't it? And so that's probably a good thing. So at some point, you're going to plan your first contact. And so the first thing I'll go back to and remind you of is get your narrative straight. Who are you? What are you offering? What do you see? What do you need? And you want to develop several different versions of this. And you need for your team to be absolutely singing from the same sheet of music on this one. You can't have different people in your group saying different things to people, because that will confuse everything. So what you do is, you develop a short version, you develop a slightly longer version, you develop a full-blown version. The short version is for when you finally make cell phone contact. The slightly longer version is when you meet somebody from that village or that community in the airport or on the road, and you have maybe 10, 15 minutes. And the long version is when you are asked by the mayor of the town to stand up and explain to the community what you're about to do. So all of those things are important. It's the same story, it just comes out in different ways. I put some terms in here for this: brokers, gatekeepers, stakeholders, key informants. Cultural brokers are people that kind of open doors but also shut doors between cultures. In a lot of the communities, you may not know anybody at first, so how do you gain entry? Well, maybe somebody comes forward and say, oh, my brother works in that community, I'll go get him, he'll introduce you. So now you have a broker or a gatekeeper. You have somebody who's going to introduce you to people. Who's he going to introduce you to? So be very careful about how you enter a community and who you pick as a broker or as a point of contact. When we were in West Africa, it was relatively easy. Everybody in the community was a Muslim. Every one of these communities had a local imam. Every one of these local villages had a village chief. We went to the imam first, then we went to the chief. And we explained ourselves to those two people. In comparison to that, Russia was chaotic. We had no idea who was really in charge of things. So we tried different things out. And we settled on a bunch of people who proved to be quite good. These became our stakeholders and our key informants. These are people who know the truth about the situation, they understand what you're up to, and they're willing to help you. Not everybody in the community is like that. Sometimes they're willing to help you, but they don't know a lot. They don't have a lot of sort of influence. Sometimes they're very suspicious of your motives. They don't want to help you in the first place. So stay away from those people. But you will find that certain people will come forth. And if you're a student, you make the right choices, you'll find good people to work with. So as I said a minute ago, follow the local protocol, whatever it happens to be, because people will respect that. Try and come with trusted and respectable people if you can. Try and do a little vetting, a little checking. Be absolutely clear and honest with people. If there's a power structure in this place, start at the top. Even if the top turns out to be inefficient and incompetent and corrupt, start there anyway, because that's the only way to do this. Put yourself in the position of being a learner. Ask for advice, ask for guidance from people. Ask their help, right? And then start looking for your key informants and your supporters fairly early in the game. Because the kind of work that you're able to do, the success of your work depends almost entirely on, not on the technical performance of the machine or on the quality of the cement that you manage to pour, but on the people that you form relationships with. That's what will get you through one of these projects. And so you need to learn how to express respect, trust, and thanks. You always have to respect people. You always have to say thank you to people. You always have to show them that you're a trustworthy person. And if they have particular notions of hospitality or reciprocity, you need to fall into line with those. Okay? And ask yourself throughout the process, you're there because you want to do a project and you think you can help people. What are they talking to you for? What are they getting out of this? What's in it for them? And you have to understand that. So we've said that the key informants are people who understand what you're up to, willing to help you, and know things. Right? So we need to find those people fairly early and work with them. The things that get in our way. Things that get in the way, we used to call this stuff rural development tourism, and I've gone into some detail on this in other courses. But when you're driving around or you're walking around one of these places, you're not seeing everything. So the longer you take in terms of time to get to know this community, the better off you're going to be. But God forbid, you should be driven into this community in an air-conditioned Land Rover and driven past, right, a whole row of huts or houses, out the other side, stop at a local bar for a cup of coffee or a beer, and then home to the Capitol, and they go, right guys, there you go, what do you think? You haven't seen a damn thing, right? And so there's a spatial bias. If you stick to the roads, you see what's on the road. You don't see what's off the road. There's a project bias. If they are delighted to show you the only working water pump in the whole damn place, then that's what you'll see. You won't see the other ones that are broken, okay? Person bias. If you can't speak the local language, then you're going to meet people who can speak your language. And they will be a strange cross-section of that community in most places. They will not be normal people. Season bias, you're probably going to be there at a time when it's relatively easy to travel through the area. And if you went during the wet season, for example, in Senegal, or during the winter in Russia like we did, you'd see another country. And that's important. And then finally, protocol bias. If you come in sort of introduced by your gatekeeper or your cultural broker as, oh, these are people from one of the most important universities in the United States, everybody's going to be super nice to you. Nobody's going to say no. You're going to get offered endless cups of tea and cookies. And it's going to be oh so polite. And that's not really what you're looking for. You might start off that way, but you need to move into a more of an informality and relative frankness with people. So, you take your time and you overcome bias in various ways. You look at a lot of different things, you see them from different angles, you talk to a bunch of different people, you don't get captured by one faction in this village or community, and you hone your ability to ask good questions and understand the answers. And don't expect it all to happen overnight, because it won't. It's not like working with a problem set where you've got like 24 hours to bring this back to class. This may take weeks or months in some cases. So what are you looking for in these communities? Well, first and foremost, you are looking for connectivity. How are you going to communicate with these people when you're back on campus? You need to give that some very serious thought. Leadership. Can you identify the people in this community who are important in some way? That is to say, that are opinion leaders, that are people that other people listen to. Who are the stakeholders? Who gets what you're doing and is willing to support you? What sort of experience do people already have? They've all had some experience in life. Have they had experience with projects like this before? If so, what is that experience? How can you use that to help the current situation? And then finally, how do they express interest? This may be a culture where people are very diffident. It may be a culture where people are very enthusiastic. You need to be able to gauge how interested are people really, okay? So those are some of the main things. Final point is about stakeholders. Stakeholders are not necessarily leaders, but they're the people who are going to help you do the work. So they're people who have interests in your project. They also have resources. They have knowledge. They have muscle power. They have brain power. They have influence. They can be persuasive. So you can plan for your involvement with those people, and you can manage your relationships with those people productively. They are your biggest resource. So finally, at the end of the day, you've identified a community, and your problem now is, okay, so what are we going to do in this community? And we're back now to the narrative. How much time do you have? How much money? How much skill? How much patience? Who's going to support you? What sort of expectations or needs are coming out of this community? And what are the risks that we all run in case things fail? You know, if you break something, maybe it's no big deal. But if you kind of do like, you know, The Music Man or something like that, and get the whole community invested in something and it doesn't work, you have a plane ticket back to Purdue. They don't. How is that going to work out? So these are judgment calls. And you need to have wisdom, and you need to have experience to make those calls effectively. And so if you've done it the way I've sort of outlined, taking your time, talking to people, forming relationships, you will be probably wise enough to make those decisions. Okay? So, the last few things, you want a workable and accessible physical setting, you want people who are going to support you, You want a range of things that you could be working on, and you want to minimize risk and harm to everyone. And make it easy, make it fun, make it short, and make it as insightful as you possibly can. There you go. That's the end of that. Well, I can do that in 35 minutes. 40. Good. Okay, so we got a few minutes for questions before my colleagues from Anthropology and Engineering take on part 2 of this. Anything? Perfectly clear. Okay, we got 2 questions. Go ahead.
If you are encountering that, like, you had certain, basically, you had certain principles when you went to Senegal or Russia about like what you were there to do, and if you were like, I guess my question is this: how do you develop that narrative for yourself? Because if you need to explain that to them, you have to have it clear yourself. Like, how do you develop that this is okay for you to do, and then suddenly this is against your principles of development? How do you learn about what should be done and what shouldn't be done?
Okay, so you have to bring together your own capabilities and their interests or needs. And so knowing what your own capabilities are is relatively easy. I mean, you've got a lot of different skills and you've done a lot of different things. Understanding what their needs or expectations or interests are is a very different matter. And what I didn't mention here is something that probably is very important for answering your question. Both in Senegal and in the Russian case, we had spent considerable time right at the beginning not doing anything, but just living there. And so, you know, the gentleman had asked me the question early about, you know, my idea of wells and so forth, and I said, no, it came from our understanding that they needed water. I had been living in Senegal for over a year before we even began this kind of work. And so we'd been living there, we'd been looking at what was going on, we'd been talking to people, we formed some good relationships. In the Russian case, we weren't living there that long, but we went out and took an 8-week trip where we went all around, and we didn't offer anybody anything. We didn't have a narrative at that time. We went into this place and we said, we're from the United States, and there's a lot of interest in the U.S. in partnerships with the newly emerging Russian Federation countries. What's on your mind? What are the sorts of things that you're interested in? And after 8 weeks, we came back with a pretty good idea of what the needs were, and that's when we started to develop a narrative. So you're right, there's that whole period. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because I'd sort of forgotten about it. And it took us a while. It was very confusing at first.
Similar question. So you
Similar
answered
question.
it. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Anything? All right. Very good.